I had my fun. While he waited, now he's marrying someone who never played him. She sent me the invitation card. She sent me the invitation card because she knows it would hurt me even more knowing how much pain I am in already. She wants me to suffer, and that's why she did it. Despite knowing that he's my ex-boyfriend whom we barely just broke up with, he wants me to suffer too. That's why he watched her do it. My name is Rose, and I'm 28 years old. It's so painful that I'm only just realizing how true that saying is. The one about not knowing what you have until you lose it. It particularly and specifically applies to me because I really didn't value what I had until I finally lost it, and worse to her of all people. I dated Dan for almost 4 years, and for all of those 4 years, I never really respected him. I cheated on him a countless number of times because I felt like that was my only opportunity to explore, because once we got married, it would really be cheating if I did cheat on him. I was having my fun while he waited, and funny how now he's marrying someone who never played him, and probably never will. Mary had always loved Dan right from the start. She was the first one to be friends with him. They had been childhood friends, and she had always been in his life. Although she had loved him all her life, which everyone could clearly see, Dan had never seen her like that. He had always seen her as his baby sister. At least that was the definition of the relationship he told me he had with her, and throughout our relationship, it was the way he had really treated her. I became friends with Mary and met Dan through her. To be honest, I had always been jealous of Mary. She had everything I didn't. She was very smart, jovial, and loving. She also had rich parents and a friend like Dan. She had everything going easy for her. The one thing she did desire the most, though, was Dan, and he definitely wasn't paying any attention to her, at least not in the way she wanted him to. Dan liked me from the start, obviously. From the day Mary had introduced us, he hung around us like a fly. Even Mary had told me that he never stayed as long as he did except when I was around. I found his attention cute at the time, although I was in a relationship at that time and I loved my then boyfriend very much. But I liked how Dan paid attention to me the way my then boyfriend didn't, and it obviously made Mary jealous, so I let him butter me up. I even flirt with him and let him take me out on dates. Mary wanted me to stop playing with his feelings if I wasn't serious, but I just dismissed her words. She was jealous, I knew that. Her forever crush wasn't paying her any attention. Eventually, I broke up with my then boyfriend after finding out about his numerous girlfriends at the time, and I truly got serious with Dan. In fact, for 2 whole years we were together and so happy together. I lived with Dan, and because of my insecurities, Mary stayed away from us. We weren't friends anymore. On the occasions that we had no choice but to meet, we only exchanged pleasantries while I talked about the things that Dan was doing for me and how he was so in love with me just so I could further drive the nail in. Mary finally moved away from our side of town, and the reason she had given was work. Even though she and I both knew that wasn't the main reason she moved away. I was finally relieved and felt like I didn't have to impress anybody, but that safely meant I cared less about Dan, not exactly that I wasn't in love with him. I love Dan very much, and I still do love him. He's smart, witty, and was financially capable to tend to all my needs. In fact, I stopped working right after I moved into his house, and Dan wasn't bothered about it. But since I didn't have anyone who made me feel the need or pressing urge to protect my relationship, I really started to misbehave. It was first with the outings. The ones I never really did tell Dan about until the last minute, or sometimes never. I went out and did all sorts of things, to be honest. At first, I really didn't want to cheat on Dan, but it was just tempting not to, especially when your friends were always almost leaving you behind every time with different men on their hands most times. Sometimes it was a dare amongst them. They would bet on who would get the hottest guy, and they would go men hunting and only come back when they have made the club's bathroom a good bedroom, or not at all. I was mostly always left alone and left out, but that day had been different. I had always said no. I never was interested in spending the night or few hours with a total stranger, but it was different. Perhaps it was the drink, or maybe it was my friends walking away again and asking me not to wait up for them. Perhaps it was the fact that I got ditched again and had to somehow find my way home all on my own. The first time I cheated on Dan was with a total stranger at the club, where my friends and I frequented more often than the other one we visited. I hadn't even planned anything like it. The plan was just to get wasted and party hard, but somehow when he came over to my table and stole my drink with a wink, I didn't tell or try to tell him off. I thought he was cute with his dimples and his nice body build. He talked to me like he had known me for years. Told me he was also abandoned by his friends, and when he saw my friends doing the same to me, he wanted to hang out with me. He was funny. He teased me endlessly, and maybe it was the drink getting into my head, but I found him so funny I kept laughing at anything he said. Perhaps I must have encouraged him with my laughter, so he was brave enough to ask me if I wanted to come with him. Honestly, I still wonder regrettably why I had agreed to his suggestion, but I found myself being led outside and into his car. He drove us to a hotel. He did everything from booking us the room to paying for it, then to leading me to the room, and even to removing my dress. It would be a lie if I said the drinking I did was so much that I blacked out because I didn't black out. I knew and saw everything he was doing to me, and I even participated in it. I was the one who clumsily removed his trousers when he was done with my clothes. I was the one who decided the sex positions, and each time he was ready to obey so long, it gave him as much pleasure as it did me. But the guilt came bashing the next morning when I woke up naked in bed with the stranger. It worsened when I saw numerous calls and texts from my friends and Dan. I called my friends first, and they told me that they got a call from Dan asking where I was, but they had apparently covered up for me. I went home ready to prepare the lie of having gotten too drunk to come back home at my friend's place rather than the club we had actually gone to. Luckily, Dan wasn't home, so I was free. He didn't come home for another day, and when he came back, he had forgotten everything about the issue, which made me very happy. I swore to myself that I wasn't ever going to cheat on Dan ever again. I was only going to have some fun, but that was with my friends, and that was it. But words are easier said than done, right? Because I repeatedly broke that promise I made to myself several times, and it almost became like an addiction. I comforted myself with the fact that Dan didn't know these things, and what one didn't know couldn't hurt you. I was just having fun before marriage. I always thought that Dan was a constant figure in my life, someone who will never leave me. He loved me very much, and he showed that each day. He was kind and loving, and he bought me gifts, gave me money, and pampered me. But even that wasn't enough to keep me from being greedy and selfish. I wanted it all. The double lives that I lived were the wild me and the faithful girlfriend. But karma never ceases on revenge. For a whole year, I was sleeping with random men for fun. I even paid some for their services, and other times it was just mutual sex the strangers and I would want. I wasn't doing all of these because Dan wasn't exactly satisfactory in bed. He was quite good and left me pretty satisfied each time we did have sex, but I just wasn't satisfied with having one man. I wanted to get all the experience I wanted before I settled with Dan. Knowing Dan as much as I did, I knew he had wanted us to get married right from our second-year anniversary together, but I kept pushing it, telling him I wasn't ready to get married yet. I would give him flimsy excuses as reasons why I didn't think marriage was the right path to take at the time, though I regret that action now very much, because if I had accepted his talk of marriage when he brought them up, we would be married by now, and I would probably be busy being pregnant or taking care of our baby now instead of spending all that time with some stranger at the club that I wasn't sure they understood safe sex most times. But now here I am regretting and wishing I could change things, even though I cannot. Knowing that he's getting married in a week's time if the date on their invitation card is anything to go by. Things did change at one point when I met someone entirely different from Dan and all the other strangers I had been with. Ethan is a rich and handsome young man. He was at the club that day and had noticed me. When he approached me, I thought he was cute, and I allowed him to convince me to buy me a drink, and afterwards convinced me to come with him to his hotel room. It wasn't anything like I expected. It was one of those luxurious hotels that existed that I'd only ever dreamed of going to, and there I was in the arms of a man who had a suite in that hotel to himself. I was mighty impressed, and I was ready to please him, especially after the princess treatment. I got that night drinking an expensive champagne and bathing in a very nice bathtub. When Ethan and I had sex, it was pretty disappointing, although I masked my disappointment and pretended like I enjoyed the whole thing. He was pretty pleased with himself and slept off right after, without bothering me. I stayed awake all through that night, not being able to sleep, and when it was finally morning and I made to leave, Ethan asked for my account details and deposited a huge amount of money in it. I was so shocked. I had never gotten that sort of money before in my entire life, even while I was with Dan. I became very greedy, and I was the one kissing up to him and asking him if he wanted my number for a repeat of the other night. Ethan had collected my number, and I remember being so happy and praying that he would text me again if I would get that sort of money again. It was only after I got home and Googled him that I realized just how wealthy he was. But he was apparently married with 2 young kids to his wife, whose father apparently owned the company he worked as the CEO at that moment. I dismissed the guilt that came with me having slept with a married man. The money sitting pretty in my bank account was enough to eradicate the guilt I felt. I went shopping later that day with my friends, and when I paid for everything we bought, they pestered me for the gist of how I got the money. When I told them, they were so envious and happy for me. They told me to keep the man. None of them remembered Dan in the mix, and to be honest, I hadn't mentioned him either. The money felt much greater than my guilt at that moment. I was very happy when Ethan texted me a week later to meet up with him at the same hotel. I ignored the information of his wife that I found out after sleeping with him, and I bought a new dress, flashy and sexy, to entice him more. Ethan and I slept together again at the hotel, and the experience had been exactly like the last one when I had to fake an orgasm and pretend like I was enjoying him, even though he was quite small down there. He gave a huge amount of money as he had done the last time. It was even more huge than the one he had given me before, and I was very happy. And that second time marked the beginning of my full-blown affair with Ethan. The hotel was our usual spot to meet, and I never went there without him contacting me first. It was cool with me, because I had to find a way to evade Dan at first, so he didn't suspect, and then there was the money aspect. I didn't even find any satisfaction sleeping with strangers at the club anymore, I know, because I tried again after a whole week of sleeping with Ethan and receiving money, but only once. It wasn't as satisfying as the money I got from Ethan, so I just stuck to sleeping with him alone, and then Dan. I know you guys probably think of me as a sex worker already, but I didn't care much, not at that point. All I fell in love with was the money and the power that it welded. I was buying anything I wanted without needing to save up from the money Dan gave me. My friends thought of me as a small god because of how much I was sorting out their bills. I felt needed and wanted with the money in my hand, and I saved nothing. I just spent. My messed up thought process at that point had been that if I didn't have Ethan to give me money, I still had Dan to fall back to. So I was fine. I was perfectly safe if I played my cards right. But what I didn't realize or refuse to see on time was that the game master could change the rules of the game at any point he liked. The one time Ethan and I had issues was that day I laid in his arms naked after another unsatisfying sex, but with a satisfying amount of money in my account. I asked him about his wife and what he would do if she found out about me. He was very pissed and had yelled at me. He warned me never to mention his family ever again, and even when I tried apologizing, he wouldn't listen. He asked me to get out of the room, and when I was hesitant to leave, trying to still apologize. Ethan had pushed me roughly out while I was still naked and then threw my clothes at me. I was so ashamed and embarrassed because even though we were in a private suite, the workers who had always seen me with Ethan were staring at my naked body in shock while I tried to put on my clothes. I hoped that Ethan would apologize to me for what he did, but after a few days, the chance of that happening was 0 to nothing. I became rather desperate. I had to get him back into my life. I had squandered all the money he gave me that night, clubbing with my friends, even though I didn't tell them the reason I was drinking so much, and had even gone with a stranger into the club's bathroom so he could ease my sexual tension because Dan was out of town. But when Ethan still wouldn't call or text me first, I swallowed my pride and called him first, but he refused to take my calls, and out of fear that he could replace me, I decided to send him a nude of myself so I could at least entice him back with my body. As anticipated, Ethan had called me back, but he didn't apologize, though. He only doubled the amount he would usually give me as his apology. I was fine with it, and I put the incident behind me. But sending a nude to Ethan once wasn't enough for him. He started to request for more. He would sometimes even ask me to stay in certain positions and take the pictures so he could have them. I was happy to oblige because each time he got a picture, he gave me money. It was a happy exchange. He got his own sexual fantasy fulfilled while I got my own selfish interest achieved. If Dan suspected me of having an affair prior that time, he said nothing about it. He never accused me or anything. Although he did start to ask questions of where I was and where I'd been to, and call me at odd hours when I'm usually either with my friends partying or warming Ethan's bed. But the oddest thing happened one day when Ethan had called me very angrily. He kept shouting and blaming me and was promising to ruin my life if his wife proceeded with the divorce. I didn't understand what was happening, but trying to get a point out of what he was saying was useless. And then he ended the call after threatening me, and when I tried calling him back, he wouldn't pick up or even reply to my texts. It was only when I saw the news later that day that Ethan's wife was filing for a divorce and custody lawsuit because he apparently cheated with some woman whose nudes and screenshots of chats were sent to her anonymously. I began to panic real hard, especially when I saw the nudes and the screenshot of the text online. My nudes and my conversation with Ethan was out there for the world to see. I was very surprised because even my friends didn't know that bit about Ethan and I, and they didn't even know my password to try and snoop. I couldn't suspect Ethan either, except I remembered that a week before that day, he had asked me to unlock my phone because his was dead, and he wanted to make an urgent phone call. And I had done it without hesitating because Dan had never gone through my phone in all the years we were together. Just to be sure, I called my friends to accuse them of sending those vile things to Ethan's wife, and they had been confused and upset and sounded as though they had genuinely not done it. I was scared because I knew Dan must have seen those pictures online, and he wasn't even calling me to ask me if it was true or false. I tried texting and calling him, but the effort was fruitless. I had to wait until he got back, and before he did get back, my parents had called me to yell at me and tell me to never show my face around them. I wasn't too worried about them. Not the way I was worried about how Dan would take the news. My parents had a soft spot for him and had allowed him to get away with anything he did. I knew that if he forgave me, my parents would easily forgive me too. Dan came home very late at night, and I knew the exact time he drove into the garage because I was up, too anxious to sleep. When he entered and saw me standing by the door, he smiled. It wasn't the usual smile that Dan would give me. It wasn't the, "I'm so happy to see you after having a long day" kind of smile, or the "I missed you" type. It was cold and sinister in a way, and his eyes were so distant. He looked so different from Dan, I was so sure I knew. I thought he must have seen those pictures, and I tried to speak. I wanted to apologize for my wrong choices. But Dan had spoken first. He asked me if I liked my gift, and I was genuinely confused at first. But then he laughed and dropped his work bag on the table and proceeded to sit down. He told me finding out my secret with Ethan had been relatively easy because I didn't even try to hide our chats, probably because I thought he wouldn't have access to it. He said that he was angry and knew that confronting me wasn't going to teach me any lessons. He wanted to ruin what I had with my lover and destroy my life, and so he had done what he did to get revenge. I was so shocked, and I didn't even know I was crying until my thick top felt too cold to protect me from my shivers. Turns out I was shivering from inside out and not because the house was cold. I didn't have words to say. They all felt scattered and jumbled up in my brain. My throat felt too clogged to make any meaningful sounds except the loud sobs that came out from it. Dan watched me. He just watched me cry, and he sat there reveling in my pain. When I was finally able to get words out of my mouth, the only two words that had escaped my cloaked throat was, "I'm sorry." But Dan had just smiled bitterly again and told me that I wasn't sorry that I did it. I was only sorry because I got caught. He told me he wanted me out of his house by morning and had told me that I should move out silently if I didn't want even more embarrassing pictures or videos of me trending online of being pushed out the house by security after my secret was discovered. I had no choice but to leave that morning. I was too scared of Dan to play with his words, and currently I'm staying in a house that is no different from a storage room because my friends who spent the money from the affair were not interested in sharing the consequences of my actions with me. And now, barely 2 months of trying desperately to reach out to Dan in any way possible without any success, I get an invitation card to his wedding with her. Can you see just how badly I have ended up ruining my life?